Hello guys, this is Adam Conway. Welcome back to XDA TV, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the OPPO Find X3 Pro. Last year I crowned the OPPO Find X2 Pro as my favourite phone of the year, which I guess to many was a bit unorthodox given that they're the likes of the Galaxy Fold, the S20 Ultra, all these fantastic premium devices that launched last year. But I went a little different. I went for the OPPO Find X2 Pro. I think that it was the best phone of the year, and I think that OPPO in general is one of the best phone manufacturers. So the OPPO Find X3 Pro, when that came out, I was very, very excited to find that I would be reviewing it and trying it out myself. Does it stand up to the OPPO Find X2 Pro? Does it increment upon it in a way that makes sense? There's a lot of things to unpack here, so let's get started. First of all, the OPPO Find X3 Pro, just to kind of give a rundown of the specifications, it has a Snapdragon 888 processor with 12GB of RAM, up to 256GB of storage, and a 1440p 120Hz LTPO AMOLED panel. A lot of acronyms to unpack there, but we'll get through it, don't worry. LTPO stands for low temperature... I'm going to read off the acronym because I can't remember it. Low temperature polycrystalline oxide. There you go. And what that does, it allows for the display refresh rate to tone down, to go down as low as 10 Hz on the OPPO Find X3 Pro to allow it to consume less power. So if you're reading an ebook, for example, you don't need a 120Hz display to read an ebook. So what it does is it will drop it down to, say, 30 Hz. OPPO has not released the numbers as regards how low it will go under certain situations. But for the always on display, it can go to 10 Hz, and what it will do is then it will mean that your display is consuming less power because the refresh rate is variable, and therefore you are getting the benefit of both having a high refresh rate but not having it always active at that high refresh rate and having it go lower than most phones can on the market today. But we'll get through all of the display tech later on because there's a lot more to get through at the moment. There's obviously a bunch of cameras on this, which I'm sure you've actually seen. There's the microscopic camera, which is mental. I will be showing that off. There's also a primary sensor and a wide-angle sensor, which both of these cameras are the exact same sensor. They're both the IMX766, which means that they're both 50 megapixel sensors. And then finally there's a 13 megapixel 2x telephoto, which is a big step down admittedly from the telephoto lens that was in the OPPO Find X2 Pro, which is why I'm going to talk about how it feels like the OPPO Find series doesn't really have much of an identity, sans having weird gimmicks that might actually stand out against the crowd. So with the OPPO Find, the first one, the Find X, sorry, the Find X was the one with the pop-up camera, but it was where the front-facing camera and the back-facing cameras were in this pop-up, and it was this one unified near ridge kind of thing that would pop up out the top. The Find X2 Pro then was 65-watt charging and a telephoto, and this one seems to be microscopes. But anyway, aside from that, we're going to start off with the chipset because that's what makes this a flagship grade smartphone. The Snapdragon 888 processor has no issues with practically anything you can throw at it, and anybody who knows me knows I'm big into emulation. The Snapdragon 888 is the first device that I have been able to use that has actually comfortably been able to play games like The Simpsons Hit and Run or The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker from the GameCube. Both of these games run nearly perfectly, and I've had no issues. I've actually been playing through The Simpsons Hit and Run, enjoying it, something that I haven't been able to do on previous devices because there was too much lag or too many slowdowns and it was just not fun to play. Likewise, all your usual apps will be as zippy as ever. Open Reddit, Facebook, Snapchat, Messenger, TikTok. All of these things will work perfectly without any issue, and that's something that you should kind of expect. Last generation is no issue. I think I've been saying there is no issue with X processor running your normal social media apps for the last 2 years now. It's going to always be the case, and most of these are incremental improvements that you may not necessarily see those improvements in day-to-day life for years to come, which is why those other improvements, those other tangible improvements, be it in the charging speed or the cameras or the battery life, are a lot more important in my opinion from a yearly incremental flagship. Now, getting onto that display, which you're going to be using to display all your beautiful games and apps, etc. It's a 1440p 10-bit color display display, which means that you're seeing about 1 billion colors on the screen, as opposed to usual displays which are 8-bit, which are 16.7 million color displays. That display gets up to 1300 nits, with 500 nit being the typical amount. If you are outside underneath the sun and other pixels are turned off, then what will happen is that you will end up with these smaller section of pixels that can get up to that brightness level, which is what this rated nit level generally means in smartphones. Now at 120Hz, I haven't really seen the phone stutter or anything. It's been perfectly smooth. It's been excellent to use. The display has curved edges, which means that if you're holding it in your hand without a case, you are likely going to run into some touch issues on the side of the display, but overall I haven't run into too many. I often use the phone with a case anyway, so it's not usually a big deal for me. The case that came in the box, by the way, is fantastic. It's not a gel silicone see-through kind of case. It's an actually nice in the hand feeling one that's unique over the cases that you get with other devices. And then of course when you're consuming content, you're generally going to want good audio as well if you're using your speakers or whatever. The OPPO Find X3 Pro actually comes with a pair of wired USB-C earphones in the box if you care about that. I think I would have preferred just a USB-C to 3.5mm adapter in the box, because it could mean I could use my wired headphones with them, but a lot of people will actually kind of like that, and I guess they're a good pair of burner earphones that you can bring out and use for whatever if you don't think they're going to survive wherever you're going, or if you don't really care about the sound quality, or if you're just listening to like a podcast or something, they'll do just fine. But the actual audio as well from the speakers is pretty good. It gets loud, it sounds good. I don't really have any issues. There's actually noticeable bass, which is something interesting given that these are smartphone speakers. It's not necessarily something you would expect to be able to get actual bass out of your speakers. Now, it's not powerful. It's not like, wow, these are amazing speakers, and it's not something that will actually be better than, say, a Bluetooth speaker that you use, but it's good enough that if you're out and about and you need to watch a video out loud or whatever, you could actually enjoy it and not feel like your ears are getting poked out. And then on the display, there's a 32 megapixel front-facing camera, which cuts out on the top left of the display. It's just a singular hole punch, and it's a pretty good camera. I've used it a fair bit. I enjoy using it, and it's one of the better front-facing cameras on smartphones that I've used. It does impede the display, so if you care about having that notchless or cutoutless experience, you'd likely look elsewhere. But the problem is that most flagships nowadays have some form of cutout on the display for the camera, and the pop-up camera seems to have just kind of been a transient thing that a lot of manufacturers aren't doing anymore, which is quite sad, because I know myself, even I loved having that totally unimpeded display for watching videos or browsing the internet, and just generally having that full display that's completely untouched by anything else. And getting onto that design, the design of the OPPO Find X3 Pro is pretty interesting. It has a complete unibody design. There is no real camera bump, dedicated camera bump I should say, for the cameras on the back. Rather, there is a sleek single glass body design on the back. It looks great, but I understand that some people mightn't actually like it. I know a few people who have actually said that they don't like that design. I personally love it, but I can see how it's polarizing. And now I want to talk about the cameras, because the cameras are the big star of the show when it comes to the OPPO Find X3 Pro. They're amazing. The OPPO Find X3 Pro cameras are exceedingly good, and part of what makes them so good is the fact that the wide-angle camera, because the sensor is the same as in the primary camera, the color science between both and the processing is the exact same. You just get a wider image with no trade-off if you're using your wide-angle camera. This is something that a lot of manufacturers haven't quite mastered yet, because you'll often get a phone that has a 48 megapixel or 64 megapixel primary sensor, which is then followed up by an 8 megapixel ultra-wide that looks awful. And we've seen this time and time again, and it doesn't really make sense that if you're going to go with an ultra wide, at least go all the way and put as much effort into it, because they're becoming more and more popular. But OPPO has actually nailed it here. The primary sensor is fantastic, the wide angle is very good, the telephoto is a bit disappointing, but I guess that's because coming from the OPPO Find X2 Pro, I was used to be able to zoom in a lot more. Can't do that anymore. This is what I'm going on to, talking about the brand identity. It feels like Oppo's just kind of changing it up every time, hoping either for something to stick or making the identity of the Find series about gimmicks. Because that last gimmick, the microscopic camera, is very well executed. I think the OPPO Find X3 Pro's gimmicky macro camera is a fantastic addition that actually has uses. I think being able to zoom in and see the pixels on a screen are really cool, or seeing the fibers in your jeans is really cool. Seeing all these small little things that you could never see with the naked eye, and for some people they've likely never seen these things before in general, it's excellent because it gives you a little microscope in your hand to be able to see these things. Generally speaking, I would be the first person to dump on 2 megapixel macro cameras, but this is actually an interesting 2 megapixel macro camera that has uses that are outside of just taking pictures of small things. I think that OPPO has gotten a nice little niche with this feature, enough that it feels nearly like a marketing stunt because so many people were posting these unique photos that they were able to take on the OPPO Find X3 Pro that you can't get on another smartphone. Now the phone is fantastic, and if it's a way of marketing to get into markets by showing off with these like new features of, for example, a macro camera, then go for it, because it is a useful feature. I like how it's implemented and I like to use it. But it is interesting that I would wonder if for an OPPO Find X4 Pro next year, would they actually keep this camera, or would this be another gimmick that falls by the wayside to be replaced by something else? And of course, I keep using that word gimmick a lot as if it's a bad thing. Gimmicks aren't a bad thing. They do have their places, they do have their uses, and I can understand why OPPO may want to have this unique feature as a selling point, because that's effectively what gimmicks are selling points. Gimmicks are not bad things, but it's just kind of worried me in a sense to look at Oppo's brand strategy and wonder, is this something that's going to stick around next year, or are we going to end up with something even wilder next year in the X4 Pro, and the microscope feature will be gone and not seen on any other devices? Now, the battery life on the OPPO Find X3 Pro is excellent. I've generally been getting through a day worth from a single charge, so about 5 hours screen on time. Generally speaking, flagships have less battery life in them than lower powered devices. So I came from the Google Pixel 5, which had a Snapdragon 765G, and that battery lasted forever. So it's been a bit of a difficulty stepping down to the OPPO Find X3 Pro, given that I'm on 5-6 hours of battery life. Now, you do get the 55-watt charger in the box. It's 2021. I now need to tell you you're getting your charger in the box. That's the state we're currently in. But of course, that 65-watt charger does charge up the battery from 0% to 100% in about half an hour, which is impressive because it means that even if the battery life isn't that good, you can generally top it up for a few minutes and get most of your battery life back anyway. You'll get up to about 40% in 10 minutes. Overall, the OPPO Find X3 Pro is an excellent package. I've not had any problems. The display is smooth and fast. There's no stuttering whatsoever. The performance is on par with a flagship that you'd expect. Generally speaking, when it comes to flagships, performance-wise, it's not really too difficult to gauge how well it's going to do, because on the Play Store, applications need to be able to run on Android devices. So the latest and greatest will always support pretty much everything on the Play Store, and everything will run perfectly fine. Games like Genshin Impact, PUBG, COD Mobile, all of those games will work perfectly, and there's no issues whatsoever. And with a large display as well, in Oppo's Game Center, you'll have no issues playing games uninterrupted from notifications and the like. The haptic feedback on the OPPO Find X3 Pro, just to kind of get into miscellaneous features, is superb. It feels like a proper rumbling through the phone, be it when you're typing or when you get a message or anything like that that elicits a response from the vibration motor. There's also NFC for your Google Pay and all other things that you would use NFC for. And there's also the company's ColorOS 11.2 on the OPPO Find X3 Pro. There's a couple of issues. ColorOS is still one of my favorite Android variants, or whatever you want to call them. Even today, I prefer it over OxygenOS. That's probably controversial. I've said it before. MKBHD now says that he likes it over OxygenOS too, so I was ahead of the curve, I guess. And overall, while it's very, very good still, and I like the UI, I love the customization options, there are still some things that confuse me. Like, gestures, for example, are under a section called convenience tools. What the hell is a convenience tool? On top of that, they've made some changes to how the notifications work. So before you used to be able to view more information from your notification with 2 fingers and slide down on the notification. You can't do that anymore. You have to specifically tap a small little arrow in the top right to drop down the notification to view more information about it. These kind of things are not good changes. I don't like those changes, but that notification change is pretty much all I've noticed from ColorOS 11.2 out of the features that I actually use. And then having things like convenience tools remain untouched means that there is confusion in the device settings as regards to where things are. It can be quite hard at times to find settings because you're like, oh, where would I find gestures? Would that be maybe in the display settings? Would that be in the button settings? No, it's in the convenience tool settings. Why? But thankfully it's not all bad for ColorOS, because ColorOS has loads of customization features, loads of just general quality of life improvements, which is why I like it so much. And yes, there are things that can be improved and things that can be changed, but I'm still a big fan of ColorOS, and I think that at the very least, for reviewing the OPPO Find X3 Pro, while the software is what comes on it, therefore it gets reviewed, this is an issue that's across OPPO's entire portfolio of devices, so it's not unique to the Find X3 Pro. Overall, the OPPO Find X3 Pro is a fantastic device. I could see this becoming one of my favourite phones of the year. While it's early days yet for 2021 and there are countless devices still to be launched, some of which I'm sure I will love just as much, I can see this being a contender for one of the best devices, because I remember when the OPPO Find X2 Pro last year came out, I thought to myself that this could well be device of the year material. I didn't really publicise that for the simple reason that there were another 9 months in the year or whatever when that came out. But now I'm in the same boat where I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, could this be one of the best devices of 2021? There's so much more to come out, and it is an expensive device coming in at over €1,000, so it'll be hard to judge whether it's worth that price tag. For you, it may not be. For another person, it may be. For me personally, it's a lot of money to spend on a phone in general, and I'm a big fan of it because I think that this is going to be one of the best devices of the year. Whether it is the best, I don't know yet. And frankly, nobody knows, because there's so much that can actually come out in the next year to take that title. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments of the OPPO Find X3 Pro. It's an interesting device. I'm a big fan of it. I love it, and I've been using it as my daily driver now for about 2 weeks. It's a great phone, but there are some issues or changes with it that people may not necessarily like from the Find series, or may not like from a smartphone in general. Let me know what you think in the comments. This has been Adam Conway with XDA TV. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed and liked the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.